Welcome back to My Little Corner. I'm Auntie Kara, and we're continuing with the story of My Father's Dragon, Chapter 3. My father finds the island. My father hid in the hold for 6 days and nights. Twice he was nearly caught when the ship stopped to take on more cargo. But at last he heard a sailor say that the next port would be Cranberry, and that they'd be unloading the wheat there. My father knew that the sailors would send him home if they caught him, so he looked in his knapsack and took out a rubber band and the empty grain bag with the label saying Cranberry. At the last moment, my father got inside the bag, knapsack and all, folded the top of the bag inside and put the rubber band around the top. He didn't look exactly like the other bags, but it was the best he could do. Soon the sailors came to unload. They lowered a big net into the hold and began moving the bags of wheat. Suddenly, one sailor yelled, "Great Scott, this is the queerest bag of wheat I've ever seen. It's all lumpy like, but the label says it goes to Cranberry." The other sailors looked at the bag too, and my father, who was in the bag, of course, tried even harder to look like a bag of wheat. Then another sailor felt the bag, and he just happened to get hold of my father's elbow. "I know what this is," he said. "This is a bag of dried corn on the cob." And he dumped my father into the big net along with the bags of wheat. This all happened in the late afternoon, so late that the merchant in Cranberry who had ordered the wheat didn't count his bags until the next morning. He was a very punctual man and never late for dinner. The sailors told the captain, and the captain wrote down on a piece of paper that they had delivered 160 bags of wheat and 1 bag of dried corn on the cob. They left the piece of paper for the merchant and sailed away that evening. My father heard later that the merchant spent the whole next day counting and recounting the bags and feeling each one, trying to find the bag of dried corn on the cob. He never found it because as soon as it was dark, my father climbed out of the bag, folded it up, and put it back in his knapsack. He walked along the shore to a nice sandy place and lay down to sleep. My father was very hungry when he woke up the next morning. Just as he was looking to see if he had anything left to eat, something hit him on the head. It was a tangerine. He had been sleeping right under a tree full of big, fat tangerines. And then he remembered that this was the island of Tangerina. Tangerine trees grew wild everywhere. My father picked as many as he had room for, which was 31, and started off to find Wild Island. He walked and walked and walked along the shore, looking for the rocks that joined the 2 islands. He walked all day, and once when he met a fisherman, he asked him about Wild Island. The fisherman began to shake his head and couldn't talk for a long while. It scared him that much just thinking about it. Finally, he said, "Many people have tried to explore Wild Island, but not one has come back alive. We think they were eaten by the wild animals." This didn't bother my father. He kept walking and slept on the beach again that night. It was beautifully clear the next day, and way down the shore my father could see a long line of rocks leading out into the ocean, and way out at the end he could just see a tiny patch of green. He quickly ate 7 tangerines and started down the beach. It was almost dark when he came to the rocks, but there, way out in the ocean, was the patch of green. He sat down and rested a while, remembering that the cat had said, "If you can, go out to the island at night, because then the wild animals won't see you coming along the rocks, and you can hide when you get there." So my father picked 7 more tangerines, put on his black rubber boots, and waited for dark. It was a very black night, and my father could hardly see the rocks ahead of him. Sometimes they were quite high, and sometimes the waves almost covered them, and they were slippery and hard to walk on. Sometimes the rocks were far apart, and my father had to get a running start and leap from one to the next. After a while, he began to hear a rumbling noise. It grew louder and louder as he got nearer to the island. At last, it seemed as if he was right on top of the noise, and he was. He had jumped from a rock onto the back of a small whale who was fast asleep and cuddled up between 2 rocks. The whale was snoring and making more noise than a steam shovel, so it never heard my father say, "Oh, I didn't know that was you." And it never knew my father had jumped on its back by mistake. For 7 hours my father climbed and slipped and leapt from rock to rock, But while it was still dark, he finally reached the very last rock and stepped off onto Wild Island. Chapter 4. My Father Finds the River. The jungle began just beyond a narrow strip of beach. Thick, dark, damp, scary jungle. My father hardly knew where to go, so he crawled under a wahoo bush to think and ate 8 tangerines. The first thing to do, he decided, was to find the river because the dragon was tied somewhere along its bank. Then he thought, if the river flows into the ocean, I ought to be able to find it quite easily if I just walk along the beach far enough. So my father walked until the sun rose and he was quite far from the ocean rocks. It was dangerous to stay near them because they might be guarded in the daytime. He found a clump of tall grass and sat down. Then he took off his rubber boots and ate 3 more tangerines. He could have eaten 12, but he hadn't seen any tangerines on this island and he could not risk running out of something to eat. My father slept all that day and only woke up late in the afternoon when he heard a funny little voice saying, "Queer, queer, what a dear little duck. I mean, dear, what a queer little rock." My father saw a tiny paw rubbing itself on his knapsack. He lay there very still, and the mouse, for it was a mouse, hurried away muttering to itself, "I must smell tum-duddy. I must tell somebody." My father waited a few minutes and then started down the beach because it was almost dark now, and he was afraid the mouse really would tell somebody. He walked all night and 2 scary things happened. First, he just had to sneeze. So he did. And somebody close by said, "Is that you, monkey?" My father said, "Yes." Then the voice said, "You must have something on your back, monkey." And my father said, "Yes," because he did. He had his knapsack on his back. "What do you have on your back, monkey?" asked the voice. My father didn't know what to say because what would a monkey have on its back? And how would it sound telling someone about it if it did have something? Just then another voice said, "I bet you're taking your sick grandmother to the doctor's." My father said, "Yes," and hurried on. Quite by accident, he found out later that he had been talking to a pair of tortoises. The second thing that happened was that he nearly walked right between 2 wild boars who were talking in low, solemn whispers. When he first saw the dark shapes, he thought they were boulders. Just in time, he heard one of them say, "There are 3 signs of a recent invasion. First, fresh tangerine peels were found under a wahoo bush near the ocean rocks. Second, a mouse reported an extraordinary rock some distance from the ocean rocks, which upon further investigation simply wasn't there. However, more fresh tangerine peels were found in the same spot, which is the 3rd sign of an invasion. Since tangerines do not grow on our island, somebody must have brought them across the ocean rocks from the other island, which may or may not have something to do with the appearance and or disappearance of an extraordinary rock reported by the mouse." After a long silence, the other boar said, "You know, I think we're taking all this too seriously. Those peels probably floated over here all by themselves, and you know how unreliable mice are. Besides, if there had been an invasion, I would have seen it." "Perhaps you're right," said the first boar. "Shall we retire?" Whereupon they both trundled back into the jungle. Well, that taught my father a lesson, and after that he saved all his tangerine peels. He walked all night, and toward morning he came to the river. Then his troubles really began. Chapter 5. My Father Meets Some Tigers. The river was very wide and muddy, and the jungle was very gloomy and dense. The trees grew close together, and what room there was between them was taken up by the great high ferns with sticky leaves. My father hated to leave the beach, but he decided to start along the riverbank, where at least the jungle wasn't quite so thick. He ate 3 tangerines, making sure to keep all the peels this time, and put on his rubber boots. My father tried to follow the riverbank, but it was very swampy, and as he went farther, the swamp became deeper. When it was almost as deep as his boot tops, he got stuck in the oozy, mucky mud. My father tugged and nearly pulled his boots right off, but at last he managed to wade to a drier place. Here the jungle was so thick that he could hardly see where the river was. He unpacked his compass and figured out the direction he should walk in order to stay near the river. But he didn't know that the river made a very sharp curve away from him just a little way beyond, and so as he walked straight ahead, he was getting farther and farther away from the river. It was very hard to walk in the jungle. The sticky leaves of the ferns caught at my father's hair, and he kept tripping over roots and rotten logs. Sometimes the trees were clumped so closely together that he couldn't squeeze between them, and he had to walk a long way around. He began to hear whispery noises, but he couldn't see any animals anywhere. The deeper into the jungle he went, the surer he was that something was following him. And then he thought he heard whispery noises on both sides of him as well as behind. He tried to run, but he tripped over more roots, and the noises only came nearer. Once or twice he thought he heard something laughing at him. At last he came out into a clearing and ran right into the middle of it so that he could see anything that might try to attack him. Was he surprised when he looked and saw 14 green eyes coming out of the jungle all around the clearing, and when the green eyes turned into 7 tigers. The tigers walked around him in a big circle, looking hungrier all the time, and then they sat down and began to talk. "I suppose you thought we didn't know you were trespassing in our jungle." Then the next tiger spoke. "I suppose you're going to say you didn't know it was our jungle." "Did you know that one explorer has never left this island alive?" said the third tiger. My father thought of the cat and knew this wasn't true, but of course he had too much sense to say so. One doesn't contradict a hungry tiger. The tigers went on talking in turn. "You're our first little boy, you know. I'm curious to know if you're especially tender." "Maybe you think we have regular meal times, but we don't. We just eat whenever we're feeling hungry," said the fifth tiger.
"And we're very hungry right now. In fact, I can hardly wait," said the sixth.
"I can't wait," said the seventh tiger. And then all the tigers said together in a loud roar, "Let's begin right now!" And they moved in closer. My father looked at those 7 hungry tigers, and then he had an idea. He quickly opened up his knapsack and took out the chewing gum. The cat had told him that tigers were especially fond of chewing gum, which was very scarce on the island. So he threw them each a piece, but they only growled. "As fond as we are of chewing gum, we're sure to like you even better." And they moved so close that he could feel them breathing on his face. "But this is very special chewing gum," said my father. "If you keep on chewing it long enough, it will turn green. And then if you plant it, it will grow more chewing gum. And the sooner you start chewing, the sooner you'll have more." The tigers said, "Why, you don't say! Isn't that fine?" And as each one wanted to be the first to plant the chewing gum, they all unwrapped their pieces and began chewing as hard as they could. Every once in a while, one tiger would look into another's mouth and say, "No, it's not done yet." Until finally they were all so busy looking into each other's mouths to make sure that no one was getting ahead that they forgot all about my father. Thank you for joining me today. I hope you'll join me next time. Be sure to like and subscribe to my page, and we'll share many more stories together.